This is reviewing the lymphatic system, right? So the lymphatic system is a specialized circulatory system that runs alongside the vessels of the cardiovascular system. The lymphatic system contains lymphatic vessels, which is totally separate from blood vessels, lymph nodes, as well as other lymphoid organs. So lymphoid organs are areas of the body that have the presence of a high number of specialized white blood cells. These organs are areas where the white blood cells are created, where they can multiply, and where they can also mature, meaning that they can start to recognize cells that are not part of your normal healthy human cells. All right, so they can recognize pathogens. So this is an overview of the lymphatic system. You can see in green here a series of these lymphatic vessels, all right? And then you see these little nodules here. Those are lymph nodes. So lymph is the primary liquid medium that is being carried through these lymphatic vessels. And inside of the lymph nodes, you have a number of lymphocytes, which are white blood cells, that are waiting there to encounter any pathogen that comes its way. So if it does encounter a pathogen, these white blood cells start to multiply, which is why sometimes if you're feeling sick and you go to the doctor's office, they start to feel for enlargement of the lymph nodes. Enlargement of your lymph nodes are actually a good thing. That means that your white blood cells have responded to a pathogen and are starting to multiply in number in order to take that pathogen down and eradicate it from your body. So you can see there's a number of lymph nodes located all throughout the body. You also have these lymphoid organs or immune organs that aid in the production and maturation of white blood cells. So here you can see the liver is considered an immune organ. Its role is that the role it plays is in non-specific defenses against foreign pathogens. It creates specialized proteins to help fight against these pathogens. You have bone marrow. So just like areas of the bone marrow create red blood cells, they also create white blood cells, specifically white blood cells called lymphocytes. So all lymphocytes are created here. And this is also the area of the body where B lymphocytes specifically sit and mature. We have the thymus, which is located underneath the thyroid gland. And this is a location where another type of specialized white blood cell called a T lymphocyte matures. And then we have the spleen. So the spleen is another area of the body that both stores and produces white blood cells. So now we're going to take a look at the different types of white blood cells that are part of our immune system and that travel within this lymphatic system. All right. So inside of the lymphatic vessels contains a specialized product called lymph. It is this milky white substance that accumulates around the cells of your tissue and that diffuses across into these lymphatic vessels. So inside of that lymph, it has a high concentration of white blood cells. So just like you have a high concentration of red blood cells in the blood, you have a high concentration of white blood cells in the lymph. All right, so here you can see a close-up of what a section of human blood looks like. So you can see your normal red blood cells there, and then you can see these larger cells. These are your white blood cells or your immune cells. You have about 5 categories of white blood cells that are in constant circulation around your body. They are divided into either granular leukocytes. So leukocytes is a terminology that means a white blood cell, right? So you have these granular leukocytes, and then you have agranular leukocytes, right? So granular versus agranular refers to the presence of these intracellular enzymes known as granules. All white blood cells have these granules, but some you can see underneath a microscope that are visible to the human eye, and some of the cells you cannot see the granules underneath the microscope. So that's what distinguishes the granular versus the agranular leukocytes. So if we take a look at these granular white blood cells, we see three major blood cell types, white blood cell types. You see neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, all right? Neutrophils are by far the largest population of white blood cells. These are your first line defenders against bacterial infection. They fight the pathogen, specifically bacteria. They engulf the bacteria and then they die off. So if you've ever had any type of infected wound where you see an accumulation of a substance called pus, that's actually just a collection of dead neutrophils that have gone ahead and eradicated the pathogen, and that's kind of what's been left behind after fighting off that bacterial infection. These eosinophils can also act against both viruses and bacteria, and then you have these basophils. You're going to see a lot in allergic infections, and we're going to really be focusing in this chapter on these neutrophils, not so much on these eosinophils and basophils, but definitely know the three types of cells that are considered granular leukocytes. Then we have agranular leukocytes, all right? While they do have those granules located in the cytoplasm, again, they're not visible to the naked eye underneath the microscope. Right? So the first type is a monocyte. Now, these are also another type of cell that we are heavily going to focus on. Monocytes circulate through the lymph and the blood. They can migrate into peripheral tissue in order to eradicate different types of pathogens. So they're active in the tissue and the blood. And then finally, we have lymphocytes. Make sure you do not confuse this term lymphocyte with leukocyte. A leukocyte is a general word for white blood cell. A lymphocyte is a type of white blood cell. You have B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes, which we're going to go into more detail about when we talk about specific immunity, which is our third line of defense. So your monocyte and lymphocytes are your agranular leukocytes. So let's take a look how these cells are able to travel between the blood, cardiovascular system, as well as the specialized lymphatic system. All right. So this is a close-up of some tissue in the periphery. Okay, you can see these tissue cells here. We can see capillary blood vessels located here. So inside there, you can see the red blood cells. And then here in green, you can see these specialized lymphatic blood cells. These specialized lymphatic vessels. So these lymphatic vessels are blind-ended, meaning that they start in the periphery and then they're going to end at the heart, all right? So the way that lymph is created, you have the movement of this fluid called interstitial fluid. It's this fluid that bathes the cells, the tissue cells, all right? You have that fluid that is being pushed by diffusion into the lymphatic vessels. So you can see right here, excess fluid that's surrounding in the interstitial spaces. Excess fluid and escaped proteins drain into these lymphatic vessels. All right, and that's how you get the movement of white blood cells that are being carried inside of the capillary, out of the bloodstream, and then into the lymphatic vessel. All right, once these white blood cells move out of the bloodstream and into the lymph, they can then be carried to various lymphatic organs, such as the lymph node. All right, so once that lymph enters into the lymphatic vessel, it travels to local lymph nodes. So this is a close-up of a lymph node. The lymph enters into the node where it can then interact with white blood cells. Also carried inside of the lymph are pathogens. If pathogens can enter into the bloodstream and into the tissue, they can also enter into the lymphatic vessels. Inside of the lymph node, which contains white blood cells, this is an opportunity for white blood cells to then destroy bacteria entering in through the lymph, as well as any other pathogens that might be present in the lymph. So the job of the lymph node is to cleanse the lymph from any microorganisms and abnormal cells. All right. Once this has been accomplished, the cleansed lymph drains back into lymphatic vessels, which eventually makes its way back towards the heart and will drain into the cardiovascular system. So here's our overview kind of from start to finish of where the lymphatic vessel originates and then where it ends up merging back with the cardiovascular system. So if we follow this from step number 1, arteries we know carry blood away from the heart and into the tissues of the body. As the arteries become arterioles and then down to smaller capillary vessels, that's where you're going to have the exchange of all nutrients, gases, and other types of substances between the blood and the tissue, specifically the interstitial fluid that is surrounding the tissue. All right. And it is at that area where the capillary network, the blood pressure forces the water and small solutes out of the bloodstream and into the surrounding interstitial fluid. At that point, the lymphatic vessels are beginning, so they are picking up the overflow of all of these products that are being pushed out of the capillaries, pushed out of the blood. So lymph forms as interstitial fluid enters the lymphatic vessels. Now this is a one-way ticket. It starts here and it is going to migrate and dump the lymph product into the subclavian vein. You don't necessarily need to know specifically the subclavian vein, but I do want you to understand that the lymphatic vessel does eventually merge with the venous system, returning all of that lymphatic product back into the circulatory system, back into the blood. All right. Hopefully, if everything's working properly, that lymph that's being dumped back into the blood has been cleaned and cleansed of any possible pathogens that are present.